What happens when a king who once commanded armies can no longer command his own body? King Henry VIII was once unstoppable, feared by enemies, worshipped by subjects. But in the end, he was trapped in a broken body, surrounded by silence and haunted by those he could no longer trust. His once mighty rule gave way to pain, paranoia, and isolation. No one dared speak the truth. No one dared face his wrath. But behind the palace walls, his power was slipping, and death was closing in. This isn't just the end of a king. It's the fall of a legend, but what led to the king's brutal decline, and what secrets did his final moments hide? Henry VIII is one of those kings whose name instantly brings to mind power, drama, and controversy. When he first took the throne, he was the picture of youth and strength, athletic, charming, and ambitious. He wasn't content with just being king. He wanted absolute control over England's future. This ambition would change the course of history forever. One of his most defining moments was breaking away from the Catholic Church. Henry wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, but the Pope refused. Rather than accept defeat, Henry took a bold step. He declared himself the head of a new church, the Church of England. This move wasn't just about religion, it was about power, making the king both the spiritual and political leader of his kingdom. For nearly 38 years, Henry ruled with an iron fist. His decisions shaped England politically, religiously, and socially. He was both admired and feared, but his reign was also filled with conflict, battles against political enemies, religious upheaval, and intense personal drama, including 6 marriages, all fueled by his desperate need for a male heir. Even near the end of his reign, Henry tried to prove his strength. In 1544, he went to war with France and captured Boulogne, a proud military achievement. But the cost was high. England's finances drained, and Henry's health declined sharply. The once vigorous king, known for jousting and swordsmanship, was now battling a failing body and mounting personal pressures. So beneath the image of a powerful ruler lay a man facing a harsh reality. The final battle not against enemies or armies, but against his own mortality and fading legacy. By the early 1540s, the once athletic and commanding figure of Henry VIII, famously painted by Hans Holbein, had deteriorated dramatically. His body had become a prison of relentless pain and suffering. Years of chronic illnesses, type 2 diabetes and severe gout, were taking their toll. But perhaps worst of all was a devastating bone infection, likely osteomyelitis, which caused deep, festering ulcers on his legs. These wounds were not only painfully open, but so badly infected that they oozed foul black fluid. The stench was so repugnant that even the servants who cared for him found it hard to stay close. Imagine the agony Henry endured, ulcers so deep that the very bone beneath was exposed. This wasn't just physical decay, it was a horror that slowly consumed his body from the inside out. Doctors resorted to brutal measures. To try and halt the infections, they used hot irons to cauterize his legs, an excruciating and desperate attempt to stop the rot. Despite their efforts, Henry's condition worsened, and his body grew alarmingly heavy. By this time, he weighed nearly 400 pounds, his mobility all but gone. He was often confined to his bed, unable to rise without mechanical assistance. The vigorous, handsome king who once dominated battlefields was now a shadow of his former self. His face, once regal and proud, swelled and distorted, reflecting the brutal reality of his decline. This physical deterioration was not just a medical crisis, but a symbol of his crumbling reign, a powerful monarch trapped inside a severely damaged, failing body. The king who had once ruled England with strength and vigor was now chained by disease, suffering in silence as his empire faced uncertainty. Henry's physical suffering was only half the story. His mind was unraveling just as painfully. Known for his fiery temper, in his final years, that anger became unpredictable and extreme. He swung from violent outbursts to deep lethargy and confusion, terrifying those around him. At times, Henry seemed trapped in hallucinations or delirium, haunted by the ghost of those he had executed, former rivals, advisors, and even his own wives. He would cry out for justice or mercy, as if their spirits reached out from beyond the grave to accuse or forgive him. This mental torment was deeply intertwined with his loosening grip on both faith and authority. Despite being the monarch who had shattered England's ties to the Catholic Church and boldly declared himself head of the new Church of England, Henry's last days were marked by disturbing religious uncertainty. One moment he demanded the solemnity of Catholic rituals, the next, he reaffirmed Protestant doctrines. This wavering seemed to mirror a soul torn between defiance and fear, a king who once controlled the nation's spiritual identity, now trembling before his own mortality. Was this spiritual confusion a sign of a man wrestling with the weight of his sins and the judgment he believed awaited him? A ruler who had reshaped a kingdom's faith was now struggling to find peace in his final hours, gripped by terror and doubt. His volatile moods and urgent religious demands reflected not just mental decline, but a profound dread, facing the ultimate unknown alone after a lifetime of power. Henry VIII's journey from absolute monarch to a fragile, tormented man reveals the terrifying human cost of absolute power and the dark shadow it casts, even at a king's deathbed. On the bitterly cold night of January 27, 1547, King Henry VIII's health took a sharp turn for the worse. Even in agonizing pain, the once powerful monarch was still aware enough to ask for rest. His final words were simple, almost peaceful: "I will take a little sleep." Not long after, he slipped into a coma, surrendering to the shadows closing in on his life. It wasn't until hours later that Archbishop Thomas Cranmer finally reached the king. The journey had been treacherous, slowed by freezing weather and icy roads. When Cranmer entered the chamber, his voice barely above a whisper, he urged Henry to reaffirm his faith before passing beyond this world. In a remarkable moment of clarity and strength, the ailing king grasped the archbishop's hand tightly, a final sign of trust in God amidst the looming dark. Henry VIII died quietly at around 2 a.m. on January 28, 1547. But the announcement of his death was deliberately delayed. The Privy Council feared the news could throw the fragile kingdom into chaos, sparking rebellion or inviting foreign enemies to seize advantage in England's moment of vulnerability. For 3 whole days, the court and the nation waited in silence, unsure what was happening behind the closed doors of Whitehall. This eerie pause was filled with tension, whispers, and intricate political maneuvering as power players prepared for the uncertain days ahead. Henry's death didn't just mark the end of a king, it was the closing of a violent, tumultuous era, one shrouded in secrecy until the moment the world finally learned that the man who had shaped England's destiny was gone. After King Henry VIII passed away, his body was embalmed and placed in a massive coffin fit for a monarch of his stature. But nature had other plans. As the coffin made its slow journey from Whitehall to Windsor Castle, the decaying corpse defied royal dignity. The wounds and infections Henry had suffered accelerated decomposition, far beyond what attendants expected. Dark, putrid fluids leaked from the coffin, splattering along the procession route. This macabre scene reportedly attracted local dogs which licked the remains, a grim and unsettling sight whispered about among the people. For some, this was seen as divine punishment upon a king whose ruthless reign had left a trail of blood and turmoil. The irony was bitter. A powerful ruler who had wielded near absolute authority now lay exposed in death's humiliating grasp. Despite this, Henry's funeral was a grand affair, attended by more than 1,000 mourners from nobility, clergy, and courtiers. But beneath the solemnity, tension simmered. The crowd was not only there to pay respects, but was a mix of genuine mourners, fearful onlookers, and ambitious figures jostling for influence in the uncertain days ahead. His daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, each with her own complicated history with their father, kept their distance, wary of the political storm his death would unleash. Finally, the king was laid to rest in an unadorned vault at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, beside Jane Seymour, his third wife and his only queen, to give him a male heir. The tomb was modest, far removed from the grand monument Henry had once dreamed of, a silent testament to the turbulent and brutal life that had defined his reign. During Henry VIII's reign, historians estimate that between 57,000 and 72,000 people were executed, making his rule one of the bloodiest in English history. This staggering number includes not only prominent figures such as two of his own wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, but also high-ranking officials, religious leaders, and countless ordinary people caught up during the upheavals of the era. The bulk of these executions were tied to charges of heresy, treason, or refusal to accept Henry's religious reforms, especially after his break with the Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England. Public executions during this time were intentionally brutal and highly visible events, serving as grisly spectacles designed to instill fear and reinforce the king's absolute authority. Those accused faced harsh penalties such as beheading, burning at the stake, or being hanged, drawn, and quartered. Even mere speech against Henry could be construed as treason, leading to swift and often deadly consequences. This climate of terror ensured loyalty, but at a tremendous human cost. Henry's death in 1547 left England tense and uncertain. His son, Edward VI, only 9 years old, inherited the throne under the guidance of powerful regents. The fragile political balance Henry had sought to control unraveled quickly, leading to intense power struggles within the court. Factions jostled for influence, sowing instability that threatened to undermine much of Henry's legacy. In summary, Henry VIII's reign was marked by brutality and an unprecedented scale of executions used to enforce his rule and religious changes. His death opened a precarious chapter for England as his young heir assumed power amid political turmoil, casting doubt on how much of Henry's control would endure beyond his lifetime. Behind the grandeur of crowns and the pomp of royal ceremonies stood a man facing the most human of experiences: profound loneliness. In those final hours, Henry VIII, the king who once ruled England with absolute authority, was no longer the commanding monarch. Surrounded by courtiers, physicians, and attendants, he endured a stark isolation, trapped inside a body ravaged by illness and a mind shadowed by spiritual fear. Despite the endless bustle of the palace, no comfort could truly reach him. The weight of decades spent wielding power, commanding armies, and shaping nations pressed down on his frail frame. The physical decay, swollen limbs, grievous wounds, and the mental torment left Henry a vulnerable, almost unrecognizable figure. He was a prisoner within his own flesh, cut off not just from his former vigor, but in a deeper, more terrifying way, from the certainty his crown once guaranteed. As Archbishop Thomas Cranmer approached the dying king, he spoke words heavy with truth and compassion. "You are about to appear where no titles bear weight, and no earthly power offers protection." In that moment, Henry faced the ultimate equalizer, death, a place where the prestige of a crown, the might of armies, or the glitter of gold held no sway. This haunting reminder resonates beyond the walls of history. No matter how mighty or feared, all humans stand alone before mortality. Henry VIII's final solitude strips away the myths of invincibility and reveals a deeper reality. We all face the end without guard or favor. His last hours reflect a timeless truth, connecting a towering king to the common human experience of vulnerability, fear, and the search for peace in the shadow of the inevitable. So, what can we learn from the terrifying last days of Henry VIII? Amid his towering power and ruthless ambition, his story is a stark reminder of the fragility behind authority. It reveals the brutal price paid for absolute power, the physical suffering, the mental torment, and the inevitable reckoning with mortality. How does this true story of a once great king's fall challenge our perception of power, legacy, and humanity? What shadows linger behind the crown? Thank you for exploring the final days of one of England's most infamous monarchs. If you found this journey into Henry VIII's tragic last chapter compelling, Please like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow history enthusiasts. What do you think was Henry's greatest regret in his final moments? Let us know in the comments below.